Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm Linda Galicchio, chair of the District Four-Way Test Committee, and I'm happy to introduce today's featured speaker. Al Mathis is a Rotarian, and he's served as president of his club in, I think it's pronounced, Sylacauga, Alabama, and in many local and district level Rotary positions. There's a major point of divergence from the rest of us here today and Al. For the first 14 years of his life, he lived in Illinois down the street from his grandfather, H.J. Taylor. Herb Taylor, the beloved Rotarian, past RI president, and author of one of the greatest legacies that Rotary has as a gift to us, and that's the four-way test. So I think that quite possibly Al had his interest in and love of Rotary passed down in his genes. As Al grew up, he graduated from Taylor University in Indiana as a Christian education major. He went on to obtain his MBA from Samford University while working at the DeSoto Caverns Family Fun Park in Alabama. Like most of us, Al has had a number of years of experience in various roles and organizations. Eventually, his path led him to ownership and leadership of the DeSoto Caverns Family Fun Park. It is one of Alabama's most successful attractions. Al runs the Four-Way Test Association from his office at DeSoto Caverns, and that association was created by his grandfather, Herb Taylor, back in the 1940s. Al and his wife of 34 years, Danielle, live in the park in Childersburg, Alabama. And I had to ask him, they don't live in one of the caves. So they were blessed with 4 children. They've got 3 boys and a girl. 2 are married. The family's growing. He's got 2 grandsons and a granddaughter and another on the way. So it's during his presentation here, he's going to follow up on the great sales interaction by having a little table interactive exercise. So think about what you have done in terms of the four-way test in your life, and there will be some conversation. It's my privilege to welcome Al to the podium to speak to us about the four-way test. So simple, even a caveman can do it.
We're going to have some fun here. Y'all stand up for a second here. Okay, stretch your legs. Turn to somebody next to you that you don't know and introduce yourself to them. That's great, okay. It is great to be here with y'all today. I'm Al from Alabama. That's how I introduce myself. That's the way you can remember my name. I want to tell you a little bit about my grandfather, H.J. Taylor, who wrote the four-way test. I grew up with him, and then I want to kind of challenge you and encourage you. As I've sat in some of the sessions this morning, I've noticed that that you want to increase your membership. You want to get better. And that's what the four-way test is all about, is getting better. And so I want to encourage you in that. So as right now, I want you to be thinking of how you have personally applied the four-way test, hopefully recently. where you asked yourself, is it the truth? And you made a decision because of that. Or is it fair to all concerned? And you did something different because of that. Because I'm going to have you sharing with the person across the way from you, just across the table, that story. I want you to get used to sharing the four-way test. My grandfather said, first you have to memorize it, then you have to apply it, and then you have to share it. So we're going to do all of those today. How many here have memorized the four-way test? Just about all of you. Excellent. We're going to test you on that. When you're sharing, if you can recite it perfectly, I have a pen out there in the foyer on the table right directly out that door. And every time you click it, it goes through, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? It says it right in the little window there. And I also have something that you can frame and hang in your office too. There's a pile of them out there, but it's only for those who have memorized it and can share their story of how they used the four-way test. So that's a little incentive to be thinking about that. So let me tell you about H.J. Taylor from Pickford, Michigan, way up north. He grew up on a farm, feeding cows and chickens. He used to tell me when he was a boy, he had to break the ice off of the bucket this time of year in order to wash his face. Things were tough. He learned about hard work, and he was very successful as a result. He went on, matter of fact, his town was so small that if you were to stay there and plug your razor in at the local hotel in the morning to shave, you'd see the street light dim outside. It was that little. They didn't even have a high school. He had to go to Sault Ste. Marie and as a boarding student, and he had to kind of pay his way, so he learned a Morse code or telegraph operator is what he was, and he was able to do that to kind of make a living. Probably one of the most successful things that happened in his life at an early age, I think he was about 9 years old. He went to a Methodist church nearby, and a revivalist had come to the church, and he received Jesus Christ as his personal Lord and Savior at that church, and it really revolutionized his life. He has a life of prayer. As a matter of fact, the four-way test probably wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for prayer, and I'll be telling you about that shortly. Well, because we're limited on time, I'm going to kind of fast forward through his life a little bit and bring him all the way. Well, I'll bring you to a place, his first job. He was in Evanston, Illinois. He was married, and he was selling or buying land leases from people. Not in Evanston, excuse me. It was in Pauls Valley, Oklahoma. That's where he was. And he was buying land leases and for oil. Really, the oil leases on different farmers' lands. And he went up to this farmer's house one day and kind of went through the picket fence, and he was going up to the front door, and he met the sheriff at the front door. And the sheriff said, "Herb, don't bother going in here. This family's breaking up. I just served the divorce papers, and you'll have to wait till there's a clear title on the land before you can get an oil lease on the land." So Herb started back to his car, and as he was walking back to the car, he started to pray. A short while later, he found himself sitting down with the farmer talking about his family. A short while later, he found himself in the car driving over to the neighbor's house where the wife and the kids were staying. And a short while later, he had the whole family piled in his car driving back over to the farmer's house. And then, you're right, a short time later, he was driving down the road with two pieces of paper in his hand. One was a letter to the lawyer calling off the divorce, and the other was the oil lease. He really was looking for opportunities to serve people, to love people. I don't know if you ever realized it, but the four-way test is very scriptural. If you were to look in Jeremiah 9:23 and 24, there's a verse, and I'll give you the Mathis paraphrase. goes like this. The things that excite the Lord, the things the Lord is excited about are these three things. Listen to this. Righteousness, justice, and loving kindness. You look at the four-way test. Is it the truth? Righteousness. Is it fair at all concerned? Justice. Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Loving kindness. They're eternal truths. It's just eternal truths. That's really what makes it timeless. This was developed back in 1932. My grandfather, after he graduated, or after he left there, he took his wife back to Chicago, where she was from, and he had a job with the Jewel Tea Company. It's a big grocery chain. Has anybody ever heard of Jewel Tea? A few of you have, yeah. And he worked his way up very shortly to where he was assistant to the president of the company. He was making about $42,000 a year. Very successful. And this was during the Depression, 1932. People were going bankrupt left and right. Matter of fact, the creditors were looking for people to go into some of these businesses that owed a lot of money and analyze them to see if they were worth saving. And some of these creditors, the banks, actually went to my grandfather, because he was a very good businessman, and asked him to check into this company called the Club Aluminum Company. It was a cookware company. And he did, and he found out that this company was bankrupt but still alive. It owed $500,000 more than it was worth. It had 250 employees, had a good product, but it just had made a lot of bad decisions and wasn't doing well. The bank said, close the door on the company, which meant these 250 people would be out of work, which also meant that these creditors wouldn't get paid back this $500,000. And so after praying about it, he decided that he would quit his job with the Jewel Tea Company and take over as the president of this Club Aluminum Company. He would say, you think right, you do right. That right is might. It makes a difference. It makes a difference in these kids, and you can see in the school system how it's made a difference. And I've heard of cities that have adopted the four-way test and seen crime rate reduced and all kinds of things happen. Because the way people think is how they act. My grandfather would say, you sow a thought and you reap a deed. And then you sow that deed and you reap a habit. And you sow that habit and you reap a character. And you sow that character and you reap a destiny. That's what you're after. But it all starts with sowing the thought. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? You sow those thoughts. So he thought if he could get his people to think right, that would make the difference, make them more competitive in the marketplace. So he went to the Chicago Library and looked all through it to find some kind of ethical statement. Their industry, the cookware industry, had this ethical statement which was 7 pages long. Nobody could memorize it or use it in any way. So he was looking for a short yardstick that people could measure their decisions by, and didn't find it anywhere. So, as he normally did, when he didn't know what to do, he bowed his head and prayed, sitting at his desk. And after he prayed, he took out a little piece, a 3x5 card, and wrote down 24 words on it. And that's the four-way test that we have today. And he decided he was going to try to apply, not all 4 of them, but just the first one. Is it the truth? He never realized how many times he didn't tell the truth. The first month he tried it, he was only batting 60%. That means 40% of the time he wasn't telling the truth. He was kind of telling the truth, or half truth, but he was keeping score. Matter of fact, it frustrated him so much they actually crumpled up that card and threw it in the trash several times, only to go back and pull that little card out of the trash and flatten it out and stick it back underneath the glass. He realized this is tough work. He decided to call up his department heads and have them review it. But first, he applied it to things like advertising, and they were doing, Clubland Cookware, finest cookware in all the world. And then there'd be a little thing in the advertising down here knocking their competitors, saying lies about them. And he's going, oh my gosh, we can't use these superlatives in our advertising. He'd call up his marketing guy and come in, and they all thought he was crazy. He said, no, we're just going to simply state what our product will do. We're not going to lie. We're going to tell the truth. So after struggling with this, he called in his division heads and sat down at a table, and he passed the four-way test around to them all. And they were different denominations. He had a Christian Scientist, an Orthodox Jew, a Presbyterian, and a Catholic. And he asked them, is this anything in the four-way test against what you believe? And they all agreed, no, this goes along with what we believe, and we want to memorize it and apply it. And so as a result, it started out with 6 of them there, and they started applying it to things that came on. They had, this is kind of interesting, they had a guy who did a print job for them, and he was $500 cheaper than the other printers that they had bidded it out to. And after the print job was done, the printer came back and said, I wonder if you could see your way to paying me $500 more than my bid, because I realized I made a mistake in my bid and bid it too low. And so they all sat together, pulled out the four-way test to make, and this was when they were $500,000 in debt. I mean, they were looking for every single penny they could get. And they started going through, is the truth? Yes, he was telling the truth. Is it fair to all concerned? Well, they discussed that. It was really, wouldn't be as fair to us because we gave him the bid. But they realized when they got to the loving kindness part of the four-way test, they were going to build a lot of goodwill with this guy by giving the and they couldn't get it done any cheaper anyways, and so they decided to pay the extra $500. Later on, they had a big order. Salesman was so excited. He had this great big order for these utensils. And they had this policy that they would sell to their suppliers or to their customers for a certain price, and then they would sell those products at a certain price. But this customer wanted to undercut, wanted to sell it for a less price. But it was a gigantic order. And they brought it before same group, and they sat down, they applied the four-way test, and this was not going to be fair to their other people they were selling to, and so they actually turned down order. Now, it wasn't quite that simple. There was a lot of yang going on, and a lot of struggling, and that's the process is what was most important. And as a result, it made a difference in that company. And to make a long story short, within the next 10 years, they were able to pay back the $500,000. And then in the next 10 years, they were able to pay their stockholders over $1 million and have $1 million left over. And this is back during real tough times. But it was good people, a good product, and the four-way test that made a difference. This integrity, people wanting to get better, to be better. And it made a difference in the confidence that their customers and their suppliers and even their employees, because once you start applying the four-way test, it was like a virus that ran through the whole company, and everybody started applying it in their schools, in their homes, in their churches, everywhere. And it really revolutionized that community as a result. Well, from there, my grandfather was like I am here, sharing at a Rotary event one time. He was a member of the #1 club, the Chicago Club, and they had invited him somewhere to share about the four-way test, and he got up and shared the four-way test, and there happened to be a couple people in the audience that were directors of Rotary International. And they said, Herb, will you repeat that? I want to kind of jot that down. And they did, and they took that back to a Rotary International board meeting, and they said, we've been looking for something to help us promote the second objective of Rotary, high ethical standards in business. And we think that the four-way test is just that. And so they voted on it, and as a result, the four-way test is on the desks of businessmen all over the world. 1 million 200,000, and decisions are made by it every day. The very first time I shared the story of the four-way test, a gentleman came up to me afterward, and that was the highlight of my day. He shared his own personal testimony of how he became a Rotarian and how he used the four-way test. He had gotten his four-way test when he became a Rotarian, and it was a plaque, and he gave it to his secretary and said, "Go hang this someplace." And she did. And then about 6 months later, he was in the boardroom, and they were having a discussion. They were working on a contract with his union, and there were, the union people and the management people all around the table, and they're, battling out these negotiations. And it was just, he said the air was so thick in there you could cut it with a knife. And he was so frustrated, and he kind of leaned back, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw the four-way test hanging on the wall. It was the first time he had read it. He looked at that and said, "That's what we need." He pulled it down on the wall, and he said, "Oh, let's gonna," it was really testy in this room. Said, "I want you all just to take a second here, and we're going to take 5 minutes. I'm going to pass this around, and I want you to apply whatever you're thinking to these 4 questions." He did that. Within 5 minutes after that, they had come to a decision. And he was elated. He was so excited. I wish I could bring him here today. He'd be jumping up and down about the four-way test and how great it really is. And the reason I brought these is because I want you to do the same thing. Really, the secret to the four-way test is not knowing it, because it isn't taught. The four-way test isn't taught. It's caught. It's caught. When you share it, when you apply it in your life, that's what makes a difference. Let me tell you what we did in our club. In our club, we have a four-way test moment. We have it every week. You don't have to have it every week. You might have it once a month. But that's where you call it, where the committee head of the four-way test, he calls up and says, "Hey, Joe, you got the four-way test moment. You got to share the four-way test or how you used it in your life this week at Rotary." And he gets up, and for 30 to 60 seconds, he just shares how he used the four-way test. That testimony is exciting because it's real. And a lot of times they aren't always success stories. They're hard stories, but they're real. And you see the four-way test at work in your club. So let me just encourage you to do that. I'm just going to take a second here, and I want you to turn to the person across from you and share the way you have used the four-way test in your life. Go ahead. Am I not working?
No, you're working fine, but these things really burn batteries. And when they do that, they start...
Yeah, great. Okay. Yeah, right. That's great. That's what I like to hear. You can even try this in your club where you share it across. Let me recommend that your district give an award every year to the four-way test club. It'd be a four-way test award. That's something we do in our district. Whereas if you do, not only recite it, but you have someone share something, how they use the four-way test at least once a month, they can become a four-way test club and get a four-way test award at the end of the year. That's something you you might want to implement in your district. We have it in our district to help encourage the use of the four-way test. Now, the four-way test is something you got to get excited about. You can't just sit there. So, one of the things I wanted to do is to, first of all, you need to be committed to it. You need to commit yourself to applying the four-way test. For some of you, it's very difficult to think of a situation where maybe you applied the four-way test. Well, we don't want that to be difficult. We want it to just roll off your tongue. So, what I want you to do is turn to your neighbor right now. Turn to your neighbor. Say, neighbor! Oh, neighbor! I'm going to apply the four-way test. Now look at another neighbor, somebody different. Look him in the eye and say, neighbor! Oh, neighbor! I'm going to apply the four-way test. Okay, y'all stand up for a second here. Since most of you, if not all of you, have memorized the four-way test, we're going to teach you all the four-way test cheer. It's just not said like this. Of the things we think, say, or do, number one, is it the truth? And that's probably how it goes across in your cup. Is it there, dog? We're going to say it with excitement. Are you ready? Okay, I'll say of the things we think, say, or do, and I'll say number one, and then you yell out as loud as you can, is it the truth? And then I'll give you number two. Are you ready? Of the things we think, say, or do, number one. Is it the truth? Number two.